Of OSHIP. Lots of fun stuff to discuss this week. But for those of you who've never tuned in before, I want to give you a quick reminder of what the show is all about. I get a chance to talk to leaders, C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and a lot of kind of an extended cast of really interesting people I've had a chance to meet over the years. And we like to talk about, not just moments of success and interesting stories they've had, but frankly, maybe moments where things didn't go so well, things went a little bit awry, or as I like to call them, oh-shit moments, and how they dealt with those. And sometimes those stories are inspirational, sometimes they're a little bit sad, sometimes they're really funny, but in all those cases, or at least most of them, I think there's some really good lessons to be learned. On a quick personal note, before I introduce this week's guest, I have a couple very exciting things to announce. For those of you who've been watching the show for the last year, or certainly during COVID, you've noticed there's kind of a running joke, not so joke, that I constantly cannot get my glasses correctly positioned on my face. Every episode, it's like this, or it's like this, or I'm fiddling with them, or I'm touching them. I have new glasses. I finally got to leave my house. Screw you, COVID, by the way. And take care of some personal life stuff I wanted. So I have multiple glasses that fit me properly and I can see well. So no more making fun of me about my glasses or razzing me before, during, or after the show. That includes the team I work with. All that being said, it looks like we're starting to get out there, and I'm getting my second COVID shot next week on Tuesday, and I'm just really looking forward to getting out of my year-long kind of personal O-ship episode of this COVID pandemic. Anyway, back to the show. This week, we've got a really fun guest on called Marci Weisler. Marci has got a very interesting career. She currently is the Chief Commercial Officer of a company called Vengo Labs. She's also the CEO and co-founder of SWSI Media. She's been a digital leader for companies like Time Out and Condé Nast or Condé Net, their kind of like subdivision. Just a really, really, really interesting set of experiences. And several of those companies that she's worked with have had some pretty interesting curveballs thrown at them. So today, the subject of our show is digital out of home, mobile, and motherhood. Lessons learned from rapid pivots during challenging times. And with that, welcome to another week of OSHIP. Marci, welcome to the show.
Hey, Freddie. Nice to be here having me.
Thanks. It's again interesting year we've had. We've had a chance to catch up a couple times recently, and been dealing with both our fair share of pivots. So I was anxious to get you on the show. I touched a little bit on your background, but it would be great if you could just give our audience a quick kind of brief overview of your background and some of the things you're focused on.
Sure. And first, to your comment, I'm actually in my company's headquarters and office today for my first live meeting in over a year. So
it's got to feel good. Congratulations.
Yeah. So double vax, a few weeks out. It's all good, all weird. So I am currently the Chief Commercial Officer at a company called Vengo Labs. We are a place-based marketing platform that does digital out-of-home media. We do data-driven product sampling, and we do unattended retail, all in the places people go, which does make it interesting when people aren't going places. But I've been here for the last 2+ years. And prior to that, I've spent my career building and growing startups from mobile to online payments, to running digital groups at places like Time Out, like you mentioned, and launching them into the digital age, to also doing a lot of consulting for companies, both startups and brands in terms of digital transformation, innovation, and founding SWSI Media, which is Smart Women, Smart Ideas, a platform and media company that's all about giving women founders and leaders exposure and helping them to grow big.
A lot to unpack there. I definitely want to go back and dig into smart women's smart ideas, because I think that's just an interesting territory in general. But let's talk about Vengo Labs for a moment. There's a kind of unattended retail part of this. For those of you who haven't seen the products, they're almost like I hate using it. It's like a vending machine with a big digital screen on it. Not to oversimplify it, but is that kind of fair on some level?
That is fair on some level, and if I don't move, I could actually show you one if you want to see, since I happen to be in the warehouse.
I'm too nervous to move the camera yet.
I know, me too. At the end, if we have
trying crazy things live,
because
that I'm sure I'll regret
it's
later.
just around the other side.
Yeah,
so.
We're gonna try. We'll try that in a minute.
So Vengo has a network of compact digital vending machines. So we have a screen on the front, which runs digital out-of-home media. We dispense physical products. So a vending machine, and some of those products are sold. Some of them are given away as samples in exchange for answering some survey questions and giving data. So we do these in contextually relevant locations. So for example, gyms are a big piece of our location. We're typically in the locker rooms in the lobby. So if I walk into the women's locker room at a Planet Fitness and I forgot my lock, I can buy a lock. I might see an ad running for Visa that says, if you use your Visa card to do this transaction, you'll be entered to win something. And I might see a beauty brand like Clinique giving away a sample of new moisturizer in return for answering some questions. Where do you typically buy your beauty products? Is your skin oily or dry or normal? What's your email address? And then it dispenses. So there's like
That's
real
cool.
physical
So an interactive component to it. That's really smart.
And we've, so that's what we
But now the big problem, of course, and it wouldn't be a ship if I didn't ask about this. I said it has to, someone's going to interact with it. What happens when you've got no one to interact with? How do you guys kind of deal with that being, in the last year?
After you get over your big O ship, when everything starts closing down and people start staying home. No, it was a real, super relevant for our conversation. So we had a great growth year in 2019 going into 2020, both in terms of expanding our network and the number of locations, as well as building out our media sales and our marketing platform and the clients there. So when COVID hit at the beginning of last year, it truly was an O-ship moment, and it was, what are we going to do now? How do we roll with this? So I will say that there you go. We did a few things, and we really ended up using the time very wisely to really put our development and our digital team on some projects that were made to both expand what we can do business-wide and respond to COVID. So the first thing that we did was we sourced PPE. And so in addition to the products that we typically offered, we found masks and gloves and sanitizer, and ended up doing a big rollout with the New York City MTA, the transit system. So we're now in the subway, commuter rails, so you can find a Vengo on the platform. If you need a mask, you can buy a mask. So that was big, and we're rolling out those types of products as businesses that we're in, like gyms, open up. We're stocking those types of products that people will need that they didn't need before the pandemic. We also got concerned because we're a touch screen. And so would people be willing to touch the screen? That's been part of our selling proposition. We can give data, do surveys, things like that. So the team was tasked with creating a solution that was touchless. So very quickly, our really smart developers, we set up a mobile program. So now we have QR codes on each of our machines. They are dynamic. You scan the QR code when you go up to the screen. That experience that you were having on the touch screen, if you choose to touch the screen, you can still do that, or you can scan the code, have it all basically on your phone in the palm of your hand. And at the end of whatever experience you're going through, it's basically like a remote control for the vending screen.
Yeah,
you can make a purchase on your phone, you can run a sampling program, and then it triggers the dispensing of the product. So that was the second thing that we did. And then the third thing we did was really spend some time on the back end. And the platform that we manage, we have a SaaS-based platform that manages our whole network, all the digital that's going on, all the physical products, the inventory when we need to be restocked, all our digital out-of-home media. So we were able to extract that platform, and we started rolling out screens in places people were going still, like grocery stores, with partners who had other types of kiosks where we put a screen on top of their machines and run our digital out-of-home media there. So we are now extending that program. So now that people are starting to come back, we're seeing, increased demand to put our kiosks in the locations. We're also putting screens out. We just announced a content partnership yesterday with Gallery Media Group, which runs Pure Wow and 1 through 7 p.m. so that we have engaging content when people see our screens. So we've really used this time to innovate.
Yeah, I got to ask you real quick, when you go, I'm trying to imagine this process, right? So, I guess March or April last year, you start realizing that you guys might be in a bit of a predicament. I'm guessing. Is that fair?
Yeah, March.
But you've got a technology product, right? So it's not like you can just be like, hey, we're going to flip it by Monday and change direction. Chameleon Collective, like we're a people business, right? Yeah. So we were able to pivot really, really, really quickly. I'd love to understand, like, how do you do that in a company like yours? Because obviously, like, it's also when you pivot in a technology company, it's a commitment. You don't just, there's really meaningful levels of effort going into it, and you could drive the product down a direction that, it doesn't work. Normally you vet all these things, but you have to move so fast during last year. I'd love to understand, like, what that process looked like for you.
Well, I think for us, we have a team that's really nimble, a bunch of people who have been together for a while. So we understand what our platform can do. And in looking at where were we seeing success and how could we optimize what was on the list that we hadn't gotten done. Some of it came from there, and some of it just came from looking at what behaviors are changing, what behaviors are going to be COVID-centric, do we think? Clearly, no one has that crystal ball. And what do we think people will do when the world opens? Clearly, a year ago, I think like most people, we thought maybe we'd be gone 2 months, 3 months, not 12, 13 months. So, we had to take a real hard look at where could we use our resources, where, we had to be conservative on certain fronts, because with people not in the venues that our machines are in, and frankly, many of them were closed, digital out-of-home media, for those who don't know much about it, it's billboards and street furniture, ads that you see in the subway, but it's also, we're in a category called play space, which is in gyms, in hotels, in offices. And if people aren't there, clearly media doesn't want to be there, marketers don't want to be there, or won't spend money if there's not audience. We always show we have audience. So we really had to, kind of back off that forward-facing front. We still kept educating our agency and brand partners of what we were up to. So when we're ready, as we've been opening up and seeing businesses open up, we're very much on top of that. But it enabled us to do some of this back-end work. The other thing we did that was really useful, both from an internal and an external perspective, is we have motion sensors on our machines and our screens. So we can measure traffic. And that has been really helpful in seeing where is there really audience, where are consumers going, and informing our agency partners, our brand partners of that. We know that at this point, 90% of our network is open. We can see transactions on this many machines, and we've monitored the traffic patterns both week over week and how they compare to pre-COVID levels.
Yeah, that data must be fascinating. I don't know if you're able to share this, and if you can, obviously, no offense taken. are you able to kind of indicate how close we are getting to normal, I guess is the word I'm looking for?
I mean, we're seeing, so within our network, and we've got about 1,500 of Vengos out there, we are starting to see traffic flowing in about 90 or above % of locations. So this is just in the last couple of weeks. And we look at, has someone bought a lock? What kind of motion sensor data? We're not necessarily, most of those locations still have traffic restrictions. So they're not quite there in terms of the amount of traffic, but we're getting back to almost 100% of the network is seeing traffic, and we're going from, we're kind of now seeing about 70% or so in a lot of the locations. So we're very optimistic about, the summer, the second half of the year, vaccines, people really antsy to get out, and seeing people really looking to go back to the places that they miss.
I find digital out of home personally really interesting because for me, I'm such a diehard digital guy. To see this kind of convergence of digital and physical spaces is just very interesting to me. And I'm intrigued to know when you think about, I guess, the last year, the impact it had on your business. Obviously these can be really transformational times for a company, right? And sometimes there's a short-term pivots where you go, hey, we had to do this to survive, or had to do this to, enter the kind of new reality of the world. But do you think that there's anything that you like, not just you, but when you look at the industry of digital out of home, do you think that there's been any kind of permanent industry shifts, if that makes sense? We learned some stuff this year. This is never going back the old way because this is really smart,
I think, no, I there are a few silver linings here. And listen, I'm a glass half full kind of person, even though I've had a few glass half empty moments in the last year, being in my apartment for a very long time. But I think a lot of the innovations we did, listen, PPE is product. I think people are going to continue wearing masks for a while in certain situations. I think once I start taking the subway again, I'll probably still wear a mask. But it's more about the innovation that we did on the digital front that gives us, launching those screens on top of kiosks in grocery stores, because we knew there was still audience there, enabled us to build this platform and media player that now opens up a whole new line of business for us. And that's something that's a new focus. So that's been pretty critical. The mobile piece, I think this year has trained people on QR codes. So there's a lot of opportunity to continue down that. It's not just something that will be out there during COVID and will take away. It enables us to do some more interesting things on the screen, scanning codes, running programs that are very rich, that might have a on our screen component as well as a mobile component, both from visual and retargeting. And the other thing is, industry-wide, in digital out of home, it's accelerated the digitization of a lot of the back-end buying. And we expect to see more buyers coming through digital out of home programmatic. Some of the digital budgets that were not digital out of home budgets are going to move over and extend so they can be supported by digital out of home. And we're unattended retail. We're also product sampling, and we do some work with retailers. And we've seen a lot of the innovation conversations on that front that were, kind of poking along just because the pace that industry and that vertical kind of moves at. A lot of acceleration, which we can provide solutions that people were talking about, 2 to 3 years out. That time frame has condensed. So I do think.
So even though it's kind of a rough short term, this may have accelerated you a couple of years forward. So you're going to jump. You lost a year, but you may have gained 2 potentially in the big picture. That
cool. Is how we're looking at it. So it's both in terms of the innovation we've done ourselves and the acceleration in the industries we work with, we think will have a lot of opportunity as we go into the second half of 21 and into 22.
I love that. That's super interesting. So I want to jump back in time a little bit, because I feel like this is, you said you're a glass half full person, but then you've had your couple knocks over the years. So is there another example of where you've had a kind of a rapid change in your environment that's caused you to have to pivot like this before?
I've certainly had a few.
What's your favorite one then?
Although I think none of them had the stay-at-home element, don't leave your house.
What, you haven't been through a giant global world-altering pandemic before? I'm shocked, Marci.
Yeah, I'm ready for the next one. Not really.
Oh God, I hope not soon.
I said, not really, just joking. Yeah. No, I've definitely had a few, and particularly, having spent a lot of my career coming up through the early digital startup world, as a lot of the technologies that we take for granted today were first being deployed. Change was coming in fast and furious. And, I think we often forget, because everything has become so second nature, how, even 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the things that we do today were just starting. So, one example is I was running business development for a company that was doing mobile alerts to the desktop, because we didn't have mobile phones, and you couldn't necessarily get real-time information on a dial-up connection. And this was, very early in my career. And we had this great service, and we were competing. The one competitor in the space, I was at a company called Air Media. The one competitor in the space was doing this broadband, like bandwidth eating application. We're like, that's never going to work. Went out, did, 50 different deals with CNN and weather and all sorts of really amazing partners. Well, you know what? Broadband came in fast and furious. And it was like, oh, shit, we got to look at it differently. And I ended up being put on, the company had two divisions. One was this consumer facing division. One was a very mobile infrastructure company. And I ended up being put on the implementation of a gateway within Sprint. And I am a business person. I am a relationship person, business development, general management, running things. I'm suddenly looking at these very technical implementation kind of project management. That was a big shift. It was eye-opening and enlightening. It really hurt, because we were so passionate about the company and the consumer product, but it saw its time, and its time came and went really quickly.
So that's a tricky one. When you think about something like that, and I'm sure, look, it's been a long time since it happened, and it's probably easier to reflect on some of these things now, and frankly talk about them without fear of repercussion. You see something like, again, not to bring up the pandemic that we're all sick of talking about, but we knew there was theoretically we know there's an expiration date on it, and it's going to end. But then you see something like that where it's not a fad, it's not a phase, it's not a trend. It's like completely kills a business model.
And it really did kill that business, at least the consumer side of it. For me personally, taking on this very technical project at a big mobile carrier, it was, as I look back on it, and you had me talking about this the other day as we were catching up, it was a little traumatic, but it was also, it kind of pushed me to really be open, and I learned a whole new skill set and got to understand how things work from a much deeper level.
Do you mean from a technology or the business side?
From a technology level. it didn't end up changing my career trajectory per se, but it gave me a deeper sense of understanding of how do things work? How do I get things built for the future? I mean, I kind of took that project on for about 6 months or so to get that done. And then it was like, okay, I got to get back to and find what's next and up and coming. But it really, after the initial jarring impact, it was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this well. What can I learn from it? What can I take from it?
Would you say that, again, where it may not, you feel like it didn't change your trajectory, but do you feel like you took some of the lessons learned from this and applied it at Vengo?
I think I've applied it throughout my career since, in terms of ensuring that I work really closely with tech teams, understand, not at an engineer level, but understand how things work, be willing to ask the kind of question that might be the quote unquote dumb question, because I'm not deep in the technical, but to understand what are the, could we make it work this way? Or how does that work? Or why are you doing this? To sometimes help to improve the product or figure out how a partnership can work. I think it gave me a lot of the skills and language that has benefited me since, in terms of really being a partner to the tech side of the businesses that I've worked with.
Interesting. So let's talk about another curveball that I think is worth touching on, that also has hit you recently, and I think maybe also caused you to pick up some new skills. I know you've got a 15-year-old son. What was that like, being a senior executive and dealing with the last 12 months?
I've probably spent more time with my teenager than I ever would have if I wasn't trapped in the house. But it has been, it's been a juggle. I've got to say, having a kid who's a teenager is a little different than having a little kid. And I have friends who have smaller children that need supervision all the time. And I really, I feel like I had it easy compared to them over the course of the last year. But it's been interesting to see someone kind of grow in front of you all the time with constraints. I think it's built a work-life integration, because we had two of us working at home, one kid schooling and trying to live his life at home. So seeing a lot of things we probably wouldn't have seen, and even having the opportunity for him to see us work and sometimes, mimicking my conference calls. He made a comment recently that he was like, I don't think I want a job that I have to just be on the computer all the time. I think he was watching work from a very different place than a normal work. And, me as chief commercial officer doing business development, partnerships, strategic stuff, have always been out there. So there's a lot more social. It's just now over Zoom or what have you.
Yeah.
But it was, I think there was a lens for him into that. On the non-work front, my kid, he was a good cook and into cooking before, and he got really into cooking. And so we were able to cook together a lot. In some ways, he's better than me in the kitchen. And it's also interesting how he learns, which
my wife surpassed me this year as well, by the way. I think some serious cooking skills were developed this year for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And what's also interesting is watching him, which I think is very indicative of the way, Gen Z, younger kids are getting information, is most of what he's learned and knows how to do. I mean, some of it's from me, but most of the rest of it is from watching videos and as a teaching mechanism. So that's been, that's certainly been something. And then just watching the whole school thing, but that's a whole other conversation of remote school and wins and fails, or maybe it's not even wins, but what actually kind of worked and really what didn't. But that could be another podcast.
That's a whole other show, huh? It's funny. On last week's show, or maybe it was the week before that, I talked about this concept that with Generation C, which is what they're indicating they're going to call, this new generation of youth that grew up during COVID, that they are maybe the first generation to have 99.5% digital literacy, basically out of necessity. And that, yes, we talked about how the millennials are so digital and whatever, but they're still not all of them, but that this generation had to because of schooling and everything else, right?
Right.
And I had argued that they, would maybe adopt technology in a way that other generations hadn't, which may be perfect timing for things like the birth of widespread VR use.
Yeah.
But what you raise is a really interesting point. I don't have a teenager, and I sometimes forget the fact that they want to do the opposite of whatever their kids do. I can think back in my own childhood and remember now that it's almost what I want to do with my dad and my mom, for the record. But yeah, it's interesting. How many kids are actually going to go, I spent so much bloody time on a computer growing up during that year that I want to go out and be a fireman, or I want to be in construction, or I want to do something that gets me out, a field biologist or something. I don't know.
Too soon to tell in my case, but it was also, it was important to be able to let him go out of the house when he could, when it was safe, like playing soccer and meeting his friends on the field, because otherwise it was all about screens. It's not, so I think it'll be interesting to see the impact. I agree with you.
That seems like a smart idea. So speaking of smart ideas, I'd like to jump back to something we touched on at the beginning of the episode, where I mentioned your organization, SWSI. Could you tell me and our audience a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I started a company called SWSI Media, Smart Women, Smart Ideas. This was we kind of started 2013, 2014 and launched. And again, talking about how much things change so quickly, even back then, which isn't even 10 years ago, there was a lot less focus around bringing female founders, female leaders to the forefront. It was happening, but not in as pronounced a way as I think in the last 3 to 4 years things have been, particularly in the wake, or not in the wake, but as Me Too happened more, as there's more talk about equity across gender, across race, across all different things. And we just wanted a platform. There were women starting companies, a lot of them in the product space, that just needed the exposure so that they could, as we said, get known, get funded, and go big. And I have 2 partners in that business who both were women who had come up in tech and media. And we often found ourselves as the only woman in a room full of guys or on a leadership team. And so we just wanted to provide a platform. So we created a series, first a digital series, and got E-Trade to sponsor us, and created a concept and brought in a production partner and ran a web series called Queen Bee that got picked up by BET. And we did a full TV show, which was essentially a Shark Tank meets mentorship for Black women entrepreneurs.
That's cool.
Really give them exposure.
I love the name, Queen Bee.
Yeah, and the TV show was Queen Boss.
Still cool. I still kind of like Queen Bee better, but they can have it.
Yeah. So lots of rights issues, things like that happen once you're part of being acquired by a Viacom brand. So lawyers get much more involved.
Yeah, I bet.
So, and we've done other things around promoting women, giving them a platform, connecting them, advising them. And so very much feel passionate about ensuring, there's a lot of effort right now in terms of women on C-suites, women in the boardroom, getting funding to go to women, because it's still, while I think the conversation has increased, I haven't looked at a number recently, but still the amount of funding that goes to female founders is still abysmally small. And how do you change that ratio? So I think it's something that,
you mentioned Me Too earlier, and again, I think I want to make sure I get everything right. I think it's interesting to kind of just flesh in these things a bit deeper. Why do you think Me Too caused it? Is it just because the concept of women's issues became more prevalent, or?
I think women's issues, as well as in the framework of power, too, mm-hmm. and who's in the boardroom, who's making the decisions. So I think to that, and just as the conversation about women in business, as it becomes more data driven and people talking about it, like how many, there's a whole range of what percentage of the dollar does every woman get? And that's broken down. Usually there are some racial disparities, but it's not equal and it's not at par. So there are a number of initiatives, companies, organizations that have popped up in the last 3-4 years that are spreading the message that, you know what, things aren't equal, and this is why, and these are ways to get there. This is what needs to change. So I do think, I'm using that Me Too context more as a catalyst for the conversation about who's making the decisions. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of this other stuff, it just amplified some of the talk that was going on. And I mean, look, you look at the last year, and how many women have either voluntarily or involuntarily left the workforce because of being a mother at home. Mm-hmm. There's plenty, again, whole other conversation. There's this proposed Marshall Plan for moms that Reshma Sujani, who started Girls Who Code, has put out there that's getting some traction within governing bodies. But how do you really make it so there can be equity and there's a platform for understanding? I also think, listen, a lot of dads and parents who did not have primary responsibility got a much closer look at what it takes to manage an unusual situation, but manage the kids day to day.
Yeah, it's another one of those things, like who multi-generational impact something like that is going to have.
Seriously.
So if you think about whether it's women in the workforce or even women as entrepreneurs, any kind of big takeaways that guidance or advice that you've kind of gathered from that group that you'd give to any aspirational female leaders out there right now?
I think one, don't be afraid to think big and act big. And I think, looking at what are these big, bold possibilities, making sure your voice is heard, not letting people talk over you, and not necessarily having to change your way of working in order to be successful. And, listen, some of the other stats that are out there show that companies that have women represented, whether it's through a founder or on the leadership team, like there are all sorts of great performance metrics that show, it drives results in a very positive way. So I do think, don't be afraid to think big. Don't be afraid to go for it. Try to find solutions. And I think one of the great things, hopefully byproducts of the last year, is that the world is thinking about work a little differently. As I said, I look at it myself as a little bit of work-life integration. There's more opportunities for remote work. There might be, I'm thinking there's, a lot more possibility for someone to take a role and not have to travel as much as one would have pre-pandemic. I mean, for myself, every once in a while, I love going away, and I love to be in a room with people that were sharing ideas and catching up with old colleagues and people I've done business with, many of whom have become friends. But to be able to do that once a quarter instead of once a week changes your ability to take on certain types of roles and experiences that I think now that everybody's, or most people, have become pretty Zoom video conference savvy, I at least have a new appreciation for what can get done, this way. And then, as I said, I'm at our office today for the first time. We had a meeting with someone. I was excited to come and meet people in person, to actually show off what we do in person, but it doesn't have to be every day.
Well said. I know that there's a better way I could wrap up this week's episode, especially some of the kind of inspirational comments you had before, just shortly as we were ending. So I think that's a great high note. I think it's a great positive place, and it can leave some people thinking for the day, hopefully. I just want to thank you, Marci, for taking some time to do a ship with me. This was great fun. I'm glad you were in your office again. That feels good. It seems like, again, feeling a little bit more of that normalcy. And, and I knew a bit about Vengo Labs, but I didn't understand things like the sampling side of it. It's really smart. Cool company. So
Thank you.
We're excited to see how that continues to evolve for you this year.
Yeah, listen, I'm going to keep my little glass half full and look at it optimistically, because that intersecting with consumers in the real world, mixing digital and physical, I think there's a lot to be said. We're not all avatars. Even this, that's interesting. Even the pandemic, we're still all us and still talking face to face, not necessarily with some sort of digital mask on.
Have an awesome day. And for those of you who are watching and you've been watching to the end, best thing you can do to support us, give us a like, give us a share, anything you can do to help spread the word. Again, it's just something we do for passion, and your support means a lot to us. So thank you very much for tuning in to this week's show shift. And thanks again, Marci.
Thank you so much, Freddie. This was really fun. It was a welcome part of my day.
Awesome.